Thank you all for joining us. I have two wonderful people here from the the value creation work group within our household goods subcommittee. So maybe just to get us started, if Tila and Morgana, you could introduce yourselves.
Sure. Thanks, Alexa. Tila Gleason, and I'm the Senior Vice President of Global Client Services for Sudeth Moving and Storage based out of Jacksonville, Florida.
Hi, I'm Morgana Summers. I'm the Director of Global Services for the International Association of Movers. For those of you who might not be familiar with who we are, we're the largest global association of movers with about 2,000 members representing over 170 countries. I personally have about 20 years in the household goods industry. I started on the moving side, so I've known Tila for many years from that side of being a mover, both operationally and on the sales side. So excited to have this conversation today.
Now
Yes.
that's why I didn't say how many years we're gonna.
Well, we've clearly got some great experience here. So maybe let's just jump right in. So, why should mobility leaders view household goods as a strategic component of talent mobility rather than just simply a logistics function?
So I'll start and then Morgana can absolutely add to this. I think without a doubt, household goods is really the most personal part of the relocation process. So if you think in terms of all the work that goes into building a policy and a strategy behind that policy, this is really where that policy meets real life. And so you really get a good feel for whether or not everything that you put into it is really going well. And so I think it's real important to bring the household goods providers in at the early stages so that we can be and help be strategic with your plan, because it really does tie back to that employee confidence and trust with that brand that they're tied back to.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, Tila. It's the real moment, right? It's once your stuff gets picked up out of your home, it's like, wow, this is actually happening. All these months, sometimes even years that it's been planned, like it's go time. And that is a really important component in the strategy, I feel like, as far as sure, logistics are complex, and they are always going to be complex, but it really comes into that planning. I always look at moving the same as, a wedding or a big event, right? It's never going to go off well if the planning hasn't gone off well. And that, like you said, it comes to trust, comes to partnership, and comes to communication. The other thing is the world is becoming a more complex place these days. We've got so much going on, and especially in the international arena. BD just published a state of industry report, and something that came out of there was that the volatility and operational disruptions are no longer exceptions for movers, right? They're expectations. This is just how normal business planning has to work. So it's challenged the industry to have to think even more on their toes than we have historically. So yeah, absolutely.
That makes sense. So what role, I guess, to get into the specifics, does household goods experience play into the employee satisfaction, productivity, and assignment success?
I can go ahead and start out with, yeah, I can start out
Yeah.
with that one. So I think we kind of, started that journey and understanding that it's when reality hits, right? So to me, household goods generally is like a core memory in the employee experience because it is the real life things happening. It's the actual tangible part of the relocation. So I think it does create that core memory, and that core memory, like we all know from growing up, sets who you are, sets how that experience is going to be. And it gives really that first impression of how the employer, values their employee, right? So it's going from it just being a job role to being a personal experience, to understanding that the needs of the employee are being understood and being met. And I think that that's a huge part of setting up a successful relocation, but really a successful job role on the other end. And that really goes into the employee well-being, which I'm really happy to hear is much more of a buzzword these days than it has been historically. I think that we've very much seen these as kind of transactional, move one person from here. And sure, logistics is transactional, but that well-being of the employee and the family is the make or break if that's going to be successful or not.
Yeah, I would tag along with that. I think the stress level in a move sets the tone of how so many things go at home and at work, right? Because you're carrying the things that aren't going well in the home to work with you, and the focus really can't be on the job at hand and the tasks that you've been assigned. So I really think, getting back to what you said about emotional well-being and employee well-being, it's, the faster that that employee settles in emotionally and operationally, the faster they can focus on the job and the tasks that they've been assigned with. And so I just think, going back to, home life is chaotic, it's going to translate into how you're performing at work. And so I think you're going to have better assignment success when you really allow the move part to go very well. So we play a critical part in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just one other thought that I had there too is, the workforce is so different than how it used to be now, in that there's a lot more communication across employees of what their experience is like. And unfortunately, consumer, or let's say brand loyalty, is not as strong as it used to be. So that satisfaction of that relocation and that moving experience generally historically was kind of seen as, I'm going to get a promotion, or this is a big advancement for me, or, it comes with a huge salary increase. That may not always be the case these days. People may be going on relocations that they might not necessarily want to, or think of it as a brief experience. So having that kind of beginning phase set up, having that move set up that is really giving a clear signal that the employer values the person, can create more loyalty and more retention, and maybe also even, increase attraction, right? I mean, if those people are sharing those stories, that could lead to somebody saying like, hey, I worked for XYZ company, this is my relocation experience, it was amazing, take the job, right? And that online community is stronger now than it's ever been.
That's great. I mean, I think we're touching on a lot of the parts of my next question. Obviously, which is one of the biggest misconceptions that employers have about the value of household goods providers and what they bring to the relocation program. Obviously, what you're saying is it's looking at the whole employee. It's holistic. It's not just from point A to point B. That's what we do. But are there other nuanced misconceptions or anything else that people think that you guys do that's not really what you do, or whatever?
Well, I think you touched on it. I think historically they just look at us as it's packing and transportation, and it really is a lot more than that. I think for me, the thing that gets undervalued or is a misconception is really the amount of advocacy that we do for the relocating employee. So we're advising, we're advocating on their behalf, and that can change 10 times over during a relocation. What you start out with has so many variables. Morgana touched on it earlier. We're dealing with so many disruptions. And so if you think in terms of customs requirements, in terms of shipping lanes and things that get shut down unannounced, we're constantly pivoting. And I think that the critical role that we play is really being that advocate for the relocating employee to make sure we're looking out for their best interests, keeping them emotionally intact and feeling safe, like we have their back, because you do play an emotional role in this part. That's where the advisory piece comes in. I think that's a critical part that really gets overlooked a lot of times. And the only other thing I would add to that is that a lot of times move success is measured by cost when we're talking about global mobility. And I know cost is important, but the reality is it should be measured by the outcome, because cutting costs ultimately is going to impact you somewhere else. And so I think a misconception is, oh, we've got to get the cheapest mover, or I've got the best deal because I'm working with this mover. That's not necessarily where your focus should be.
Right. Well, right, because it's hard to say if this relocation failed, it was because of moving and ship. You can't really draw that direct line, so that makes sense that you would, it's bigger than that.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, I had a differentiator is cost on my list as well, just because that can be on the consequence of the employee. If the cost is driven down, corners are cut, and then that results in the employee experience. So I totally agree with that, Tila. Stepping back just a little bit, I think that a big misconception that we hear a lot at IAM about movers in general, about the industry, is that there's a lack of trust with movers. And this comes from just years of widespread stories of rogue movers, of hostage shipments, of moving scams, right? We see them every year on Dateline or CNN. We hear about them, unfortunately, at IAM. So, that's kind of a big problem that I feel is kind of industry wide, is having that misconception that translates to both, employees, transferees, consumers, retirees, whoever is moving, that there is a mistrust within the industry. And that's something that we've been working on here at IAM. We've been developing a program called IAM Trusted, and it's really drawing a real-time verifiable line between the professional movers, right? And there are thousands of us that are out there that are professional movers that do a good job and do successful moves, and showing that they are actively defining their ethical business practices, operating compliantly, resolving consumer disputes, and those who aren't. So we are really excited about this program coming live, because it's also going to take into consideration the way that consumers, as well as everybody else, are shopping online these days, right? And making that dynamic data, that real-time data, available. The way that moves were procured before, and it still happens, right, is word of mouth, right? Or you get a referral, or you have relationships, and that's great. But we see more and more people being sold online, and sold based upon, like using an SEO or some sort of sponsored ad. And that's when the real problem comes, because consumers and customers and transferees, or even maybe those taking lump sums, they don't have the knowledge to do the due diligence checks into the mover. So we're really excited for that kind of answer to be out there in the industry, and to build back up that trust factor.
Yeah, I mean that's a good segue into that next question I had, which was really when a move goes well, what are the business outcomes that are protected, and what in general is being protected that it might not be immediately visible. I think some of that security is one, but are there others?
Yeah, I would say employee retention and engagement. Right, you may not know that right away, but I think if you go back and look at all of the data that people actually have access to now, that's a good story as to whether or not your household goods, your household goods move goes well. We are definitely impacting whether or not that employee is happy and successful in their job, and we talked about that earlier. I think the other thing that we do is we're helping to protect the employer brand and their credibility. No one wants to relocate with a company that doesn't have a good brand, and they don't feel their employer has their back. And I know, and Morgana touched on it earlier, we're in a different time and age right now where some people are having to move. They may not necessarily choose to move. They're having to move just to be able to provide for their families. And so I do take that into consideration. But movers are a direct reflection on the brand, and oftentimes we're the first reflection that they have of that new employer that they've signed on with, right? And so I think that's an outcome that we are protecting that isn't necessarily seen or realized in a lot of areas. And then the other thing that I would say is we help reduce a lot of internal escalations, because we are counseling to policy. We're holding to eliminate or minimize the number of exceptions we come to clients with. And so a lot of times it's managing the expectations of the relocating employee. It's really looking out for your client's best interest, but also trying to advocate for the customer and finding that delicate balance. And so, I have had my clients tell me this so many times: you only come to me when it's absolutely necessary. And I recognize the value in that. And I think that that's something that really is helping long-term in the business outcome arena.
Absolutely. Just hearing you, Teal, it's just, makes me smile, because movers wear so many hats. It's like psychologist, procurement specialist, right? Compliance adherence. It really is kind of remarkable. And I don't think that unless somebody has gone through the relocation and moving experience, that they really value and understand all the work that goes into it. And I think that I agree with everything that you said. I had mostly the same things. And I think my kind of overarching was just the protecting the investment, right? So you have started as an employer hiring somebody and then taking them on this journey to relocate them, or having somebody internal that you're relocating. And it's not just the relocation cost, right? There are so many other indirect costs going into that. The time spent by the employee, by your HR, by your procurement, by managing your vendors. And if it goes bad, you've basically have wasted all of that time and investment that you've put in, right? The worst thing you want to do is send somebody across the country or across the world, and then they say, you know what? I'm not happy. It's not going well. My family hasn't settled in. I want to come back, or I'm leaving, right? So I just think it's so important, and it is really hard when you're looking at, especially giant corporations, and it's a dollar and cents decision, right? Where can we cut costs? Where can we cut bottom lines? Um, but this is a very personal experience. And like we said before, talent is harder to come by, talent is harder to keep these days. So I just feel like there has to be a little bit of a wiser look at that retention of that talent, and that attraction of that talent. Otherwise, you are just kind of spinning your wheels and wasting your money, right? To keep having to go through that process.
I'd like to chat a little bit about, I mean, we've mentioned it, or you've mentioned it, the changing employee expectations and how sometimes the moves are different than they used to be. What, in your opinion, has changed about employee expectations around relocation, and how has household goods had to evolve to kind of meet those new expectations or changing expectations?
Yeah, I can start out on that one. To me, I kind of mentioned it earlier. We live in this online convenience world where everything is at your fingertips, right? If I need groceries, they can arrive in 2 hours. If I need something, it can come overnight. And I think the moving industry has been challenged to raise the bar as far as hitting those expectations. In a world where that moving consumer, that transferee, doesn't understand why you can't give it as quick as all of these other services can give it, right? So that has, I think that has made movers, it's a challenge to movers, but I think that movers are now more tech savvy than they have ever been, right? And I talked about starting in this industry 20 years ago. I mean, it was remarkable how little technology we're going into moves, right? And how because you're providing a service, right? So there's a lot of looks onto that service, but I do think that movers have been stepping it up to become more tech savvy, to use tech to handle those operations so that they can be more customer service focused. But I think that that's one of the biggest things is really trying to hit that level of convenience that is now kind of globally expected. And then I think the other thing that, especially in the last couple of years, well, really since COVID, right, since 2020, it's been a soft moving market, both domestically and internationally, right? The mortgage rates are not doing what they're supposed to do here in the US to incentivize people to move. Internationally, with all the geopolitical situations and the pandemic, there is some hesitation with moving. So we've seen a lot of our members becoming more creative actually as a result of that, right? And it's interesting when these disruptors kind of push things to move and change. But we're seeing them diversify into different lines of business, seeing them find more creative ways to move things, finding more ways to be more sustainable. So I do think that that's like kind of another thing that, with the expectation of I'm moving, and trying to find a cheaper relocation that can do it just as quick and fast and convenient, it is pushing the industry to have to become more creative and find different ways to accomplish that.
A lot of that was prompted by air tags too, right? You had air tags put in shipments. And so then movers had to say, okay, if they can do this, we can do it. We can do it too. And the thing that I would add, because I agree with everything that you said, Morgana, we're seeing a lot of personalization come in too. Like you go to Starbucks and you can order coffee 20,000 different kinds of ways, and you're going to get it the way you want it. And I think we're starting to see that translate into moving, right? It's more customized services. People are willing to pay more for additional services to take some of the headache out of it, even if it comes out of their own pocket, if their employer isn't paying for it. So we are starting to see a lot of turnkey kind of request and that customization related to what their family needs may be, which I think is consumer driven. I think we're living in a day and age where we're used to being able to kind of pick and choose what we want and how we want it. And I think movers are starting to get very creative with that. And then I think one thing I would add, because I agree on the transparency and the visibility, wanting to be able to track your shipment or expecting the Amazon effect where I order it today and before 5 o'clock it's at my front door. I think the movers have evolved into looking for creative ways to move things. We're using containers to move shipments within the US like we used to internationally, like, primarily it was only an international service offering. Now it's becoming a very commonly used approach within the US, which helps us get things moved faster because it gives us greater flexibility with how we're building loads. So I think, tech is helping. I think we are evolving in tech in ways that we never have, but I also think we're also looking at processes and solutions that are going to meet today's demands.
That's great. So my final question is really it's advice, I guess, or if organizations are looking to improve the relocation experience, what advice do you have for them, and where can household goods partners have the greatest impact for them?
I mean, I would say early engagement, and I alluded to it in the very beginning when I talked about involving your mover with helping to develop your policy. Review your policy regular and get insights from your mover on the things that we're seeing as trends, because you may need to evolve your policy to adapt kind of what the norm is. I also think that mobility teams can help the mover by setting some realistic expectations up front. So your policy and all of your communication should mirror what services you're having your provider deliver or have them manage to. And then I think where there is the greatest success is where movers are used as an extension of the mobility team. So you're aligned. You have that trust and confidence that they're looking out for you. They're also going to take great care of your new employee or an existing employee that may be relocating. And those strong partnerships really do help the intended outcome, and it shows unity and it shows strength. And there's just a comfort level with that. So that's what I would say.
That's great. Morgana?
Yeah, I had that same point of just making sure that there's regular check-ins with your household good providers and challenging those KPIs that you're getting. I think you talked about that, Tila, is looking at in this realm of big data, right? Like what information are you getting back? How can that boomerang to improve your processes and improve your packages? And I think a big thing for me, both at IAM and when I was on the moving side of things, is challenging employers to look at, in my opinion, one reload package doesn't fit all, right? So understandably, in companies that employ tens of thousands, you have to have some policies in place. You have to make some parameters and some guidelines. But I do think that employers generally look at it as a cost comparison exercise and not necessarily a risk comparison exercise, right? So if you're looking at like a full reload versus like a core flex versus a lump sum, matching that to the needs of the employee and looking at whatever decision is made, that you are willing to forego the risk that comes with that decision. It was so interesting when I was on the customer service side, which I think is the number one key factor in a successful relocation, right? No matter if you're talking to any of the verticals, if you're talking to your own employee, that is the biggest thing. Teal, I know you're on board with me on that because I know your customer service is excellent. But when you get an employee that's relocating on the phone for the first time and you're trying to talk to them about this huge monumental life change, and they're already annoyed by the package that they've got, or they're already upset because they asked for XYZ and they didn't get it, or they don't have enough money to cover the relocation, right? Because that's kind of seen in lump sums a lot. They get this lump sum, which is a kind of arbitrary number, and then it can't even cover the costs, right? So when that's the beginning stage that you're working with somebody, it's really hard to shift that perspective, right? So versus when you've got somebody that's really had a great call internally with their HR, they've already had, part of their onboarding, you're on the same page, they understand what the relocation policy offers, they understand the needs and how those needs might be able to be met with either, exceptions or changing the way that they're doing it. They're already coming to you in this positive light, in this way that they feel valued. And it goes back to that point of being valued as an individual. But it just sets the stage for a much better experience. And I just think not just in relocation, but just in life, it's easy to put things in boxes, and humans don't generally do well being in boxes. Things do, right? Your also good things do a good job being in boxes. But I was
gonna say that's a great metaphor.
Yeah, the human experience. That was the other thing that I had. I think Tila kind of made the other points that I was thinking of. But it's a changing world, and movers and household good providers are resilient. Relo's resilient. And one other just kind of thing that I want to put out there from the other side is that I think that movers do appreciate getting those employees that have got a full reload package, especially on the international side of things, just because there's so many other pieces that go into the packing and loading to the delivery, especially when there's, Teal, I think you mentioned before, visa and customs and, when's the new house going to be available? When do my kids need to start school? And it is really nice for somebody to know that all of those things are being considered and not just the physical part of the move. And that can happen in a various different way. But, a lot of times as you get to talking to a relocating employee, they'll start to ask you those questions too, right? Well, how do I find out the school? When do I have to book my plane ticket, right? And another one of those hats comes on as a mover, right?
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Just kind of talking about adding and influencing the experience. I was thinking we have had on multiple occasions a driver panel where we bring in van operators to sit on a panel in front of clients, and we let the clients just ask them questions. And the questions always intrigue me because it's, what's the weirdest thing you've been asked to do at a home, or what's the weirdest thing that you've done to make a move go well? And I don't think the guys are given the value, and ladies too. We have females that are also operating these large tractor trailers, but they go into a home. They may be with a trailing spouse. It snowed the day before, and she can't plow the driveway or clear a sidewalk. And these guys will actually get out there with shovels and clear the walkway to make it safe for everybody and not ask a thing about it, right? So I do think we have elements of things like that where there's a lot of good that's happening in the household goods space just to try to make things better for people during a stressful time. So I think that's another area that we do. We influence it in a positive light.
Absolutely.
Well, I said that was my last question, but we did get a question come into the chat. So the question is, how, let me make it bigger. How do we deal with the supply chain process with respect to the current shipping uncertainty at the global level? So kind of a very relevant, timely question here. I know you didn't prepare this, but any thoughts on that question?
No worries. I can start with that, Teal, if you want, and then
Yeah.
you can add on to that. So, yeah, the global situation is challenging, right? And I think we kind of talked about that from the pandemic. I think we all went through the pandemic and like came out the other side and we're like, okay, we're over that. Thing's going to be fine now, right? And that's just not reality. There's always something going on, especially globally, that is a domino effect that's going to have one thing to affect another thing. And to me, it's being on top of the information. It's communicating that. It's setting those expectations realistically. And that's something that we try to do. I know you guys do it at work, and we try to do at IAM is give our members the information they need to validate what they're saying with those relocating employees or with their customers, right? So they can say, hey, it's going to cost XYZ more because it's stuck at XYZ place because of this situation. And here's an article that tells you that is a valid concern, and that's really what's happening. So I think that's some of the challenges. And I mean, I'll just pat on the back to the household goods industry. Again, resilient, able to move quickly to fix things. I mean, that's a big part of being a successful employee at a mover, is that you have to be quick on your toes and be able to find solutions. So I think that those are two of the biggest things that we can do to try to get around uncontrollable aspects of the world.
Yeah, I would tag on to that. I think that if you're not working with a supply chain partner that provides you with news updates and alerts and thought leadership, educational points on a regular basis, you need to be asking them for that, because that should be given automatically. I can say at SUDET, one of the things that we do, especially with the recent issue going on in the Middle East, we're sending news alerts about what ports are accessible and giving real live updates of how many berths are operational. And those kinds of things are critical because it does help mobility programs kind of set that tone before the mover comes involved and is actually having to deliver some not so great news. But I think that to answer that question that came in, work with your supply chain and expect that they give you news updates. Ask them, what are you doing from an educational standpoint? I'm traveling right now because we're spending time tomorrow educating a customer. They invite us in and we're allowed to do lunch and learns. And we did Moving 101 International, like what's everything that you need to know about international. We gave them live scenarios and said, how would you approach your day if this is what was sitting in your inbox when you came in? And so it gave them a new appreciation for what we do. But I think, just really getting back to having that regular engagement and thought leadership, educational value, every supplier should be doing that for you.
Absolutely. So, and just on that note, a thought was, don't be afraid to tell your customer no. Right. And I think that is a big thing, that anybody in the service industry doesn't want to say no. But I think it's very important that as movers, knowing what's going on in the world, like you said, having a good provider that can educate you to be able to say, no, here's why, and here's what your better solution is. is going to bring you immense value with that customer, right? Because you are really being a leader in the industry and being able to showcase them why it's important to go with a professional mover that actually knows what they're doing and isn't just going to ship something or send something because they're going to cash a check, right? And I think that's a really kind of important part of having that empowerment and that knowledge in the global situation. And sometimes it can be a lot kind of anxiety inducing. I mean, I do know sometimes I have to shut down the news because I can't watch it anymore. But in the industry that we're in, we kind of need to know what's going on in the world, right?
It
And
changes so quickly,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
exactly. So
Exactly.
that navigation is delicate, but it is important to be empowered.
Mhm.
Well, Tila, Morgana, it's been a pleasure to have you on this LinkedIn Live, despite the technical difficulties on my end. But I really thank you both for both your engagement here as well as your engagement within the value creation work group. That has been a really great boon this year for WRC to kind of have that all those volunteers. So thank you again, and we'll definitely be in touch.
Thank you for having us.
Appreciate it. Bye.